A great city rises where survival seems impossible. This is the mystery of lost desert capitals, places of immense power that vanished without a clear trace. By the end of this, you will understand the fragile forces that build and shatter entire civilizations. We will see how a single trade route could create a metropolis, and how a change in the wind could erase it. What does it take for a society to flourish against all odds, and what secret weakness finally brings it down? The silent dunes hold stories of human genius and haunting silence. What do you believe is the greatest threat to a thriving civilization? That defiance of the desert is the first clue to their power. A true desert capital was more than just a collection of homes. It was a statement of human will. Think of it as a command center, the beating heart of a civilization that had learned to make the impossible its home. These were places where kings were crowned, where laws were written, and where the wealth of entire regions flowed into a single, astonishing point on the map. Their location was never an accident. They blossomed precisely where the world's most valuable caravans had no choice but to pass, at the narrow gateways between towering dunes, or the only reliable oasis for hundreds of miles. Control that spot, and you controlled the fate of spices, silks, gold, and ideas. The city's wealth was not dug from the ground, but carried in on the backs of camels, taxed at its gates, and transformed into monumental architecture. This wealth funded the genius that made life possible. To survive, let alone thrive, required a mastery of the environment that feels almost futuristic. Engineers designed vast underground channels called kanats to tap distant mountain aquifers and guide water for miles beneath the scorching surface. They built intricate networks of cisterns to capture every precious drop of rare rain. Architects developed wind towers to funnel cool breezes into palaces, and designed thick, windowless walls to keep the relentless heat at bay. Every aspect of the city was a calculated response to a deadly equation. The rapid rise we see in the historical record was often sparked by one brilliant innovation or a sudden shift in a trade route, creating a vortex of opportunity. People flocked to these new centers of power, and for a generation or two, it must have felt like the golden age would never end. But that feeling was an illusion. The very source of their strength was also their greatest vulnerability. Their entire existence balanced on a knife's edge, dependent on a fragile web of alliances, a steady climate, and the unchanging path of a caravan trail. When we look at the silent ruins today, we are seeing the end point of a breathtaking gamble, a society that bet everything on controlling the uncontrollable. And that sets the stage for the most haunting question of all. What does it take to break that delicate balance? The story of Axum begins with a geographical contradiction. Far from the endless dunes, this kingdom flourished on the high, rugged plateaus of the Horn of Africa, a landscape of thin air and seasonal rains that could turn to punishing drought. Its environment was a different kind of desert, one of challenging scarcity. Yet from this unlikely ground, a superpower was born. By the 1st century, Axum commanded the Red Sea, its mighty navy protecting a web of trade that stretched from the Roman Empire to the coasts of India. Its merchants dealt in ivory, exotic animal skins, frankincense, and most crucially, gold. This wealth was so immense that Axum minted its own currency, beautiful gold coins that bore the faces of its kings, circulating from Alexandria to Sri Lanka and announcing to the world, here is a civilization of equals. The capital city itself was a testament to this global reach. Walking its streets, you would have heard a dozen languages, seen traders from distant ports, and marveled at architecture that blended local tradition with influences from across the known world. But the most striking symbols of Axumite ambition were not its bustling ports or palaces, but its silent, soaring obelisks. These monumental stone stelae, some standing over 100 feet tall, were carved from single blocks of granite and erected with engineering skill that still puzzles historians today. They were not monuments to kings in the traditional sense, but likely elaborate markers for elite resting places, declarations of status meant to last for eternity. Then, in the 4th century, a profound transformation added another layer to Axum's identity. Under King Azana, the kingdom embraced Christianity, becoming one of the very first nations in the world to do so. This made Axum not just an economic capital, but a spiritual beacon, the guardian of the legendary Ark of the Covenant, according to its own sacred tradition. For a time, it seemed Axum was blessed by both commerce and faith, an unshakable pillar of the ancient world, which makes its subsequent fade into silence so deeply perplexing. By the 7th century, the great capital's influence was waning rapidly. The towering stelae still stood, but the vibrant city around them grew quieter. So what happened to this dual capital of commerce and creed? Historians point to a convergence of subtle, powerful forces. The reliable agricultural patterns that fed its population may have been disrupted by a changing climate, a slow shift in rains that strained the kingdom's heartland. At the same time, the world was moving on. New political powers emerged in the Middle East, and the vital trade routes that were Axum's lifeblood began to shift away from its control, bypassing its ports. There is also evidence that the very resources that built the city, like the timber needed for its ships and buildings, were stretched thin. It was not a single cataclysm, but a series of slow leaks in the system. The kingdom didn't vanish overnight, it gradually receded, its power diffusing until the grand capital became a provincial town, its global story remembered only in its coins and its stones. The obelisks remain perfect and silent, guarding the mystery of how a civilization at its peak can simply step back from the world stage. This pattern of a capital rising on a single, brilliant advantage, only to be undone when that advantage fades, would be repeated with even more dramatic suddenness in the heart of the Arabian desert. But perhaps no civilization mastered the art of turning scarcity into spectacle quite like the Nabateans. Their capital, Petra, was not built on the desert but carved directly from it. Imagine approaching this city as an ancient traveler would, not by a broad road but through a narrow, winding sandstone fissure called the Sik. The towering walls block out the sun, and for over a mile you see only rock. Then the canyon opens, and you are confronted with the impossible, the facade of the treasury, Al-Khosneh, glowing in the rose-red stone. This was not just architecture, it was alchemy, transforming a hidden canyon into a fortress of wealth. The Nabateans were the undisputed masters of the incense trade, controlling the flow of frankincense and myrrh from southern Arabia to the markets of the Mediterranean. Petra was their brilliant, secretive vault. Its location was its greatest defense, a natural fortress that also sat at the crossroads of crucial caravan routes. Every ounce of wealth that passed through funded this stone-carved dream. Yet to sustain a population that may have reached 30,000 people in such a place required more than trade. It demanded a miracle of engineering. The Nabateans were hydraulic geniuses. They designed an intricate network of dams, cisterns, and ceramic pipes that captured every fleeting desert downpour. They channeled water from miles away, creating an artificial oasis in the canyon that could withstand years of drought. Their system was so advanced that it included pressure controls and sedimentation tanks to keep the water clean. In Petra, water was not just a resource, it was a form of currency and power, meticulously managed to allow life to flourish against all logic. This mastery fueled a golden age. Beyond the famous treasury, they carved grand tombs, temples, and a massive theater into the living rock, each facade a statement of permanence in a transient world. But permanence, as we have seen, is an illusion built on fragile foundations. Petra's decline was a slow unraveling of the very threads that wove it together. The first blow was political. In the year 106, the Roman Empire formally annexed the Nabatean kingdom. While Petra remained a regional center, the real power and the profits of trade began to shift north to Roman-administered cities. Then the world's commerce patterns changed. Sea routes through the Red Sea became safer and more efficient for transporting goods, slowly strangling the overland caravan trails that were Petra's lifeblood. The city's incredible water system, a marvel of maintenance, began to falter as the wealth to sustain it dried up. Then came the earthquake in the year 363. A major seismic event shattered buildings and critically crippled the intricate water management system. Without the means to easily repair it, the city's ability to support a large population was broken. People gradually left, seeking opportunity elsewhere. By the early Islamic period, Petra was largely abandoned, known only to local Bedouin tribes as a legend in stone. It faded from global memory, becoming a whispered secret of the desert, until its rediscovery by the Swiss explorer Johann Ludwig Burckhardt in 1812. Petra's story is a profound lesson in economic vulnerability. It shows that even the most ingenious adaptation to an environment cannot protect a city from the shifting tides of global trade. A change in route on a map hundreds of miles away could doom a civilization carved in stone. This raises a haunting parallel. What happens when a desert capital's reason for existence is not just bypassed but completely erased from history's memory? Petra's silent canyon is the perfect monument to this brutal economic truth. The real architecture of these desert capitals was not stone or clay, but something far more fragile: the invisible pathways of global trade. Think of these cities as grand stations on a planetary railway. As long as the trains kept running, the station thrived, bustling with energy and wealth. But if the tracks were shifted just a few miles, or a new, faster line was built elsewhere, that grand station became a ghost town almost overnight. This was the existential gamble every desert capital made. Their prosperity was never truly their own. It was borrowed from the constant movement of the world. A single, critical oasis wasn't just a source of water. It was a toll booth on the only road through a sea of sand. The ruler who controlled it could tax every spice bale, every silk roll, every block of incense that passed through. That revenue stream, steady and immense, was what paid for the armies, the artisans, and the awe-inspiring monuments. It created a feedback loop of power. The wealth attracted more people, which required more infrastructure, which in turn attracted more trade. For a glorious century or two, it must have seemed like a perpetual motion machine. But the machine was powered from the outside. The collapse of a desert capital often reads less like a dramatic explosion and more like a slow, quiet fading. There was seldom a single invading army that burned it to the ground, or a volcano that buried it in ash. Instead, the end came with a whisper, a series of small, distant decisions that together strangled its lifeblood. A war between two empires 1,000 miles away could close a border, making a caravan route too dangerous. A ship captain discovering a more reliable monsoon wind pattern could make sea travel cheaper and faster than the overland journey, rendering the desert crossroads obsolete. Even something as subtle as a change in fashion in Rome or Constantinople, a new preference for a different scent over frankincense, could slowly drain the wealth from a city like Petra. This is why archaeologists sometimes find these places seemingly intact but abandoned. The internal infrastructure, the brilliant water systems, the sturdy homes, they were all still there. But the reason for the city's existence had simply vanished from the map. The people, pragmatic as ever, followed the opportunity. They packed what they could and moved to where the new tracks were being laid, leaving their magnificent stone shell to the wind. This pattern reveals a haunting vulnerability at the core of human civilization. A society can be brilliantly adapted to its physical environment, mastering drought and heat, yet remain utterly defenseless against a change in an abstract idea, a trade route on a parchment map. It forces us to ask, what are the invisible trade routes our own world depends on, and how secure are they really? This external fragility, however, was often compounded by a far more intimate and internal pressure, one that came from the very top of society. The true cost of a desert capital's ambition was often measured in water. While Petra channeled fleeting rains, one civilization went deeper, tapping into the ancient past to build a future. Far to the west, in the heart of the modern Libyan Sahara, the Garamantes Empire performed an even more audacious feat. They did not just settle an oasis, they created a network of them, transforming a hyper-arid basin into the capital of a kingdom that lasted for over 1,000 years. This was Garama, a name that whispers of a forgotten superpower in the sand. For centuries, the Garamantes defied the emptiness. From around 500 years before the Common Era to 700 years after, their realm stood as a formidable intermediary, channeling gold, ivory, and slaves from sub-Saharan Africa north to the Mediterranean coast, and goods from Rome and Carthage back south. They were not mere nomads, but an urban society with a written language, fortified towns, and a distinct culture. Their power sprang from a single, brilliant, and ultimately finite innovation, the Fagara. Imagine a gently sloping tunnel carved deep underground for miles, tapping into a fossil aquifer, a trapped sea of ancient rainwater that had fallen millennia before. Through gravity alone, this precious water would flow to the surface, feeding lush gardens and fields in the middle of nowhere. It was a technology of staggering patience and collective effort, a subterranean web that turned the desert green. For generations, it worked. Garama thrived as a hub of trans-Saharan exchange, its wealth evident in Mediterranean-style baths and imported pottery found amidst the dunes. Their civilization was a living rebuttal to the idea of the Sahara as a barren void. It was a crossed, connected, and controlled space, but the Fagara system contained the seed of its own demise. Those fossil aquifers were not rivers that replenished with the seasons. They were like a vast, buried bank account with no new deposits. Every gallon drawn was a gallon permanently lost. For centuries, the withdrawal was sustainable, yet slowly, imperceptibly at first, the water table began to drop. Maintaining the Fagara tunnels became a desperate, losing battle. As the tunnels had to be dug deeper and longer, the cost in labor and time soared. The agricultural surplus that fed the cities and fueled the trade networks began to shrink. It was a slow-motion crisis, a gradual tightening of a noose that took generations to fully feel. There was no sudden invasion, no dramatic earthquake to blame, just the quiet, relentless arithmetic of depletion. The trade routes, sensing weakness, may have shifted. The population, facing scarcity, likely dispersed. By the 7th century, the great capital of Garama was largely abandoned, its ingenious water tunnels falling silent, filling with sand. The empire didn't so much collapse as it gently evaporated, leaving behind stone foundations and a profound, unsettling lesson. The Garamantes were not defeated by their enemies, but by the exhausted inheritance of a wetter age. They had built a magnificent civilization by mining water from the past, and when that account ran dry, their future vanished with it. This presents us with a haunting mirror. What does it mean for a society to outrun its own resource base? The Garamantes story shifts our focus from the fragility of external trade to the even more intimate vulnerability of the land itself. It begs a question that resonates far beyond the desert. What happens when the very ingenuity that allows a civilization to flourish becomes the instrument of its gradual undoing? The water that sustained Garama was a gift from a different world. Those fossil aquifers held rainfall from a time when the Sahara was not a desert at all, but a vast green savanna crisscrossed by rivers. This reveals an even deeper, more pervasive force behind the vanishing of desert capitals. one that operates on a scale far beyond any single resource or trade route. Climate itself can be a silent assassin. The stability we take for granted in our environment is often an illusion, especially in the world's arid zones. Deserts are not static wastelands, but dynamic, fragile ecosystems balanced on a knife's edge. Here, the margin for error is vanishingly small. A slight, persistent shift in annual rainfall, a change of just an inch or two less each year, might seem negligible. But over a generation, that deficit accumulates into a catastrophe. Crops that once fed a city fail season after season. The water levels in crucial cisterns and wells drop, never to fully recover. The land itself begins to change, pushing back against human settlement. These are not mere dry spells, but megadroughts, climatic events that can lock a region into severe aridity for decades, sometimes even centuries. Imagine the profound stress of watching your world slowly, inexorably dry up around you. The decisions become desperate. Do we stay and pray for the old patterns to return, or do we abandon the home our ancestors built? Conversely, the initial rise of a desert civilization can itself be a climatic trap. Many of these societies did not foolishly build in a barren wasteland. They often began during a period of unusual favor, a window of time when the climate was more forgiving. The Sahara, for instance, has cycled through multiple green Sahara phases throughout history, where monsoon rains shifted north, transforming dunes into grasslands dotted with lakes. A community that flourished during such a wet period might have established a thriving capital, complete with agriculture and complex society, believing their environment to be permanently generous. Then the climate pendulum would swing back. The rains retreated south, the lakes evaporated, and the grasslands baked into desert. The people were left stranded in a landscape that could no longer support their numbers, their grand city now an island in a rising sea of sand. Their very success had anchored them to a place that history was leaving behind. How do we know this? We are not simply guessing. The field of paleoclimatology, the study of past climates, acts as a detective uncovering Earth's old weather reports. Scientists drill deep into ice caps, extracting ancient air bubbles trapped in the layers. They examine sediment cores from lake beds and ocean floors, reading the chemical signatures and fossilized pollen grains that tell stories of wet and dry periods. This evidence paints a vivid and often sobering picture. It shows us that the timelines of a civilization's golden age and its collapse frequently align with major climatic shifts recorded in the ice and the mud. The story of a lost capital, then, is rarely just a story of political failure or economic misfortune. At its deepest level, it is a story of human adaptation meeting its absolute limit. It is the story of a society that developed brilliant, sophisticated systems to survive within a specific climatic window, and then watched helplessly as that window slammed shut. This narrative carries a profound and unmistakable resonance for us today. While our tools and scale are different, the fundamental challenge remains the same. How do we build a resilient society in the face of an environment that is not a permanent backdrop, but an active, changing participant in our story? The silent dunes, holding the ruins of cities that once thought themselves eternal, offer a humbling perspective. They remind us that climate is not just a setting for history, but often one of its primary authors. That final, silent author of history is not always a slow, creeping change. Sometimes it arrives with the thunder of hooves. In the vast, wind-scoured expanse of the Gobi Desert, the story shifts from gradual depletion to sudden, violent erasure. Here, on the very frontier of empires, capitals rose and fell to a much faster, sharper rhythm, their fate sealed not by a dwindling aquifer, but by the flash of a sword and the strategic diversion of a river. The Gobi presents a different kind of desert mystery, one where human conflict and environmental extremes conspire to bury a city's story in both sand and legend. Consider Karakoto, the Black City. By the 11th century, this fortified outpost of the Tangut Empire was a bustling nexus on the Silk Road's northern branches. Behind its imposing walls, a unique culture flourished, blending Tibetan Buddhism with fierce independence. It was a place of deep spirituality and vibrant commerce, where sacred texts were copied and caravans were taxed. For centuries, it held its own in a volatile region. Then, in the 14th century, the armies of the Mongol Empire, under a successor to Genghis Khan, laid siege. The story passed down through time says the city's end came not from a breached wall, but from a diverted river. The besiegers, legend claims, altered the course of the very water source that sustained Karakoto, strangling the city into submission. Whether the final blow was direct assault or this calculated environmental sabotage, the result was the same. A thriving capital was reduced to a vacant ruin, its libraries burned, its population scattered or lost. The Gobi's relentless sands then began their own slow siege, swallowing the blackened walls until Karakoto became little more than a strange mound on the horizon, a ghost in the collective memory of the region's nomadic peoples. Karakoto's tale is dramatic, but it is not unique in this landscape. The Gobi is littered with the spectral remains of power centers that burned brightly and briefly. Long before the Tangut, the formidable Xiongnu Confederation, the nomadic rivals of Han China, established seasonal capitals and fortified towns in the desert's river valleys. These places rose with astonishing speed as a charismatic leader unified tribes, drawing wealth from tribute and control of trade corridors. They were symbols of a fleeting, concentrated power. But when that leader passed or political alliances fractured, these centers were just as swiftly abandoned. The people simply folded their tents, so to speak, and melted back into the steppe, leaving stone foundations to be reclaimed by the dust. Their existence was almost performative, a temporary stage for imperial ambition. What makes the Gobi's lost cities particularly haunting is the desert's own active role in hiding them. This is not a passive sea of sand, but an aggressive, shaping force. The extreme continental climate, with its blistering summers and bone-chilling winters, works to crumble masonry. More strikingly, the desert's massive, shifting sand dunes are like slow, deliberate waves. They can bury a settlement entirely for centuries, only to later retreat and reveal a fragment of a wall or a stash of coins, as if the desert itself is deciding when to whisper a piece of the story. This dynamic preservation and concealment means our understanding is, and may always be, fragmentary. We find evidence of sudden conflict, like arrowheads embedded in gates, alongside evidence of prolonged drought, like abandoned wells. The lines blur. Was a city abandoned because of war, or was it weakened by years of poor rains, making it an easy target for a powerful neighbor? In the Gobi, the answer is almost always both. Warfare and environmental stress were not separate tragedies, but intertwined strands of the same rope that ultimately pulled these places down. This brutal intersection on the frontier teaches us a stark lesson about the nature of such capitals. In the heart of a stable empire, a city might decline slowly as trade routes shift, but on the edge, in the contested zones between cultures and climates, existence is inherently precarious. These were not just economic hubs, they were geopolitical pawns, their survival dependent on a fragile balance of military strength, diplomatic loyalty, and climatic grace. When that balance tipped, their end was often swift and total. The Gobi did not just host these cities, it consumed them, using wind and war as its tools. So we are left with a chilling duality. These sands preserve moments of catastrophe with eerie clarity, yet they also erase the full context, leaving us with magnificent, unanswered questions. What final moments unfolded inside the walls of the Black City as the river ran dry? What grand visions were spoken in the Xiongnu courts that now lie under silent dunes? The Gobi holds those secrets close, reminding us that some silences in history are not peaceful, but the aftermath of a storm. The silence of these ruins is not absolute. It is a quiet filled with faint, scattered whispers, waiting for someone patient enough to listen. Unearthing the true stories of these lost capitals is the painstaking, often frustrating, work of archaeologists. They are the translators of dust, tasked with interpreting the faintest traces left behind in the world's most unforgiving environments. An excavation in the desert is a fundamentally different challenge than one in a temperate forest or a river valley. Here, the evidence itself is under constant attack. Scouring winds act like a giant sheet of sandpaper, slowly erasing surface features and scattering lightweight artifacts across miles of empty space. Drifting dunes can bury a towering wall completely for centuries, then shift again to reveal it, playing a perpetual game of hide and seek with history. And perhaps most crucially, the very dryness that preserves stone and pottery works against the recovery of organic materials. Wood, cloth, leather, food remains, and even paper, the intimate details of daily life, often decay to dust without a trace, leaving a stark, incomplete skeleton of a society. So what evidence survives this harsh filter? The clues are often humble, but in their context they become priceless. A scattered collection of pottery shards, their styles and glazes, can map trade routes across continents. A hidden hoard of coins, buried in haste perhaps during a crisis, can freeze a moment in time, giving us the names and faces of forgotten kings. The simple alignment of foundation stones outlines the ghost of a home or a temple, speaking volumes about urban planning. Even ancient garbage heaps called middens are treasure troves. By sifting through these discarded layers, scientists can reconstruct diets, understand craft industries, and detect shifts in resources over time. A single miraculous find can change everything. An inscription in a forgotten script carved on a broken slab can suddenly speak a city's true name and list its rulers, pulling a place from legend into documented history. Meanwhile, subtle science reads the soil itself. Analysis of soil layers can reveal a dark band of ash, evidence of a catastrophic fire. It can show sediment patterns that speak of a sudden flood, or layers of sterile dust that point to a prolonged, devastating drought. Each of these fragments is a piece of a vast, three-dimensional puzzle, a puzzle where most of the pieces are irrevocably lost. Every dig in such a place is thus a race against both time and the elements. It is meticulous, back-breaking work under a relentless sun, brushing away grains of sand to reveal a story 1 centimeter at a time. And in a profound irony, the very act of finding these cities often deepens their central mystery. Uncovering a grand palace confirms the scale of their ambition, but finding it seemingly intact without signs of sack or burning only makes the question of its abandonment more haunting. Discovering a sophisticated water system raises the baffling question of why a society that mastered its environment would ever leave it behind. Each answer begets 3 new questions. Were they forced out, or did they simply walk away? Did the end come swiftly, or was it a long, mournful farewell? The physical evidence provides the framework of the story, the what and the when, but it rarely gives us the why with any certainty. It leaves us standing in the quiet footprint of a vanished people, surrounded by the objects of their lives, forever wondering about the final, unrecorded days that turned a capital into a ghost. This inherent ambiguity forces us to look beyond the stones and the shards, to consider a more elusive but equally powerful kind of evidence, the stories people chose to tell about these places long after they were gone. Legends often hold a kernel of truth worn smooth by generations of storytelling. In the vast trackless sea of the Rub al-Khali, the empty quarter of Arabia, one legend burned brighter than the rest, the story of Yuba. Known to the Bedouin as the Atlantis of the Sands and referenced in the Quran as Iram of the Pillars, this was no ordinary lost city. It was described as a place of towering architecture and immense wealth, built upon the trade of frankincense, that sacred resin more valuable than gold. Its end, according to lore, was divine retribution. The city, consumed by its own pride, was said to have been swallowed whole by the desert as punishment, vanishing without a trace. For centuries, scholars dismissed Yuba as pure myth, a moral parable etched into the dunes. It seemed the ultimate example of a capital that existed only in the imagination, a warning against hubris written in sand. Then, modern technology offered a new way to see. In the 1990s, researchers combined a bold approach, using space-age eyes to search for an ancient ghost. They studied radar images from the space shuttle and historical accounts of caravan routes, looking for faint, geometric scars on the desert's face that hinted at human hands. This detective work led them to a remote site in modern-day Oman. What they found was not a city of intact pillars, but something arguably more compelling: the skeleton of a major fortress and caravan station, positioned at a critical crossroads of the incense trails. The most striking feature was a massive, gaping hole in the earth, evidence of a catastrophic sinkhole. The ground upon which this settlement stood was underlain by soft limestone, a honeycomb of natural caverns hollowed out by ancient water. The very weight of the thriving city above, combined with the relentless draw from its wells, may have fatally weakened that subterranean support. One day, the earth simply gave way. Structures collapsed into the void, and the lifeblood of the settlement, its water source and its stability, was instantly destroyed. The discovery sparked immediate debate. Is this the literal Yuba of the Quran and Bedouin poetry? Many archaeologists say it is more accurate to call it a city that likely inspired the legend of Yuba, but the distinction almost doesn't matter. What the site confirms with stark physical evidence is the precise pattern we have seen again and again: a wealthy desert hub meeting a sudden, catastrophic end tied directly to the fragility of its environment. Here, the collapse was not a slow drought or a shifting trade route, but a literal crumbling of the foundation. The city didn't just fade away, it was ingested. This event, so dramatic and complete, demanded an explanation for the people who witnessed its aftermath or stumbled upon its ruins generations later. How else would you explain a mighty fortress simply being pulled into the earth? The natural disaster provided the perfect seed for a moral and spiritual story, transforming a geological tragedy into a legendary lesson about arrogance and fate. Yuba's story blurs the line between history and folklore in a profound way. It shows us that myths are rarely invented from nothing. They are often the human mind attempting to make sense of the inexplicable. A sinkhole becomes divine wrath. A city built on unsustainable ground becomes a symbol of moral decay. The physical truth and the poetic truth intertwine, each giving power to the other. This discovery forces us to reconsider all the other legends whispered across deserts. If Yuba could move from myth to map, what other lost capitals, currently dismissed as mere stories, are waiting for their kernel of truth to be found? The sands may yet be hiding more than ruins. They may be hiding the origins of our oldest warnings. That legend of Yuba is not a lonely story in the desert night. When a civilization vanishes, it creates a narrative black hole, and human imagination rushes in to fill the void. The physical city may be gone, but its ghost takes on a second life, woven into the cultural fabric of later peoples as cautionary tales, divine punishments, or fables of hidden treasure. These are not lies, but a different kind of truth, a collective memory processed through the lens of awe and fear. Consider the Persian legend of the City of Brass, a tale that spread through the Islamic world and into European folklore. It describes a magnificent, walled metropolis found perfectly preserved in a remote desert, its towers shimmering, its gates sealed. Inside, silent figures sit upon thrones frozen in time, surrounded by unimaginable wealth. The city is empty, a beautiful tomb, and its walls are inscribed with solemn warnings about the fleeting nature of worldly power and the certainty of fate. The story is a clear allegory, but its setting is unmistakable. A direct descendant of the real ruins travelers would have glimpsed in the wastes, places that stood as silent, unanswered questions. Why would such grandeur be left behind? The legend provides the answer that archaeology cannot, a moral and spiritual reason for the silence. These myths consistently preserve certain kernels of reality. The descriptions of immense trade wealth, of architectural grandeur that defies the landscape, of a catastrophe that struck suddenly, these are not inventions from thin air. They are the exaggerated, yet recognizable, echoes of real historical experiences passed down for generations. A society that saw the crumbling walls of a forgotten capital might not know its name or the precise date of its fall, but they understood the scale of its ambition and the totality of its end. That understanding was then encoded into story, becoming a form of oral history far more durable than parchment in a dry climate. For the historian or archaeologist, this presents a fascinating and maddening puzzle. Separating the literal fact from the poetic embellishment is a constant, delicate dance. Is the legend of a city swallowed by the sands a memory of a catastrophic sinkhole, like at Ubar, or is it a metaphor for a slower cultural extinction? The details are symbolic, but the emotional core is authentic. These stories are invaluable not for giving us a perfect map, but for letting us listen to the psychological impact these vanishings had across centuries. They tell us how later generations interpreted these ruins, what lessons they drew from them, and what fears they projected onto them. The lost capital becomes more than an archaeological site. It becomes a mirror for human anxieties about pride, fortune, and our own impermanence. When we hear these tales today, we are not just hearing about a city that fell. We are hearing the long, echoing conversation humanity has had with its own fragile achievements. And that conversation inevitably leads us to wonder, with all our modern tools and knowledge, could such a fate ever befall one of our own great centers of power? What would the legend of a vanished modern metropolis sound like 1,000 years from now? The legend of a city swallowed by the sands offers one kind of answer, but history also provides a far more direct and brutal conclusion. In the vast Karakoto desert of Turkmenistan, the story of Merv presents a different kind of vanishing, one not born from environmental fragility or economic shift, but from a single, overwhelming act of human force. For centuries, Merv was not just a city, it was a legend in its own time. Known as the Mother of the World, this sprawling oasis metropolis was a crown jewel of the Silk Road, a place where Persian, Arab, and Turkic cultures fused into something extraordinary. Its lifeblood was not a single trade good, but the entire flow of ideas and commerce between East and West. At its peak under the Seljuk Turks in the 11th and 12th centuries, Merv was a dazzling beacon of civilization. Its libraries were said to house hundreds of thousands of manuscripts, its astronomers charted the heavens, and its engineers perfected the underground canal systems that turned the desert margin into a verdant garden. It was a capital of the mind as much as of commerce, a place where the height of human achievement seemed permanently anchored in the sands. Then, in the year 1221, that anchor was ripped away. The Mongol Empire, in its westward expansion, reached the gates of Merv. The city's rulers surrendered, hoping for mercy. What followed was not conquest but erasure. Genghis Khan's son, Tolui, assigned to the task, carried out a methodical and devastating punishment. Historical accounts, though their numbers are debated by scholars, describe a profound loss of life. The great libraries, the palaces, the intricate water channels, all were systematically destroyed. The intention was not to capture a functioning city, but to eliminate a rival power center utterly, to send a shockwave of terror down the Silk Road. The physical destruction was so complete that the vibrant capital, the mother of the world, ceased to exist in any meaningful form. A smaller settlement would persist nearby, but the brilliant, cosmopolitan heart of Merv was extinguished. This event forces us to confront a chilling alternative to the slow declines we have seen elsewhere. Merv's end was not a mystery of dwindling resources or shifting climates. It was a calculated political decision executed with terrifying efficiency. Its vulnerability was not an overdrawn aquifer, but its very prominence. In a world of emerging empires, to be a great capital on an open plain was to be the brightest, and therefore most targetable, light. The disaster at Merv reveals a brutal historical truth. Some civilizations are not given the chance to fade away. They are deliberately unmade. Their legacy is not one of forgotten trade routes, but of a specific, catastrophic day when the world they built was chosen for annihilation. The silence that followed was not the slow creep of sand, but the sudden, deafening quiet after the storm. This kind of ending leaves a different kind of archaeological record, one of sudden fire layers, of broken statues, and of a city plan abruptly truncated. It asks us a difficult question. Is there a greater tragedy in a society slowly forgetting how to survive in its environment, or in a society having its future deliberately taken from it in a single, devastating stroke? The ruins of Merv stand as a monument to that second, sharper kind of historical fracture, a reminder that human conflict can be as effective a force of desertification as any drought. This stark reality forces us to confront the most immediate and violent end a city can face. While a changing climate could squeeze a civilization over generations, the blade of conquest could sever its lifeline in a season. These desert capitals, perched on their precious crossroads, were not just centers of culture, they were glittering strategic targets. Their very wealth and position, the sources of their strength, painted a target on their walls for any rising empire hungry for control. A military campaign aimed at such a city was not merely about capturing territory. It was often about dismantling a rival's power base completely. The aftermath of a successful siege was a calculated dismantling. The loss of life could be profound, reshaping the community in an instant. Survivors might be taken far from their homes, their skills and knowledge scattered. But the physical destruction often went deeper, targeting the very genius that made life possible there. Victorious armies, to ensure the city could never rise again as a threat, would systematically break what had been built. The intricate networks of underground water channels, the qanats and fagaras, would be blocked or collapsed. Temple complexes, the spiritual heart of the city, might be razed. Palaces and administrative buildings were burned. This was more than mere looting. It was a deliberate erasure of the city's functional and cultural identity, making the desert itself an ally in its permanent suppression. Even if the stones still stood, the trauma of such an event could shatter the invisible bonds that held the society together. The collective memory of artisans, the trade agreements held in the minds of merchants, the communal trust needed to maintain complex water systems, all of it could evaporate in the smoke of conquest. A city is a living organism, and this was a mortal wound to its spirit. Furthermore, the conquerors had their own economies to manage. The new rulers, now controlling the region, often had little interest in rebuilding a rival's capital. Instead, they would frequently redirect the lucrative trade flows to their own established cities, to places that benefited their rule directly. The caravan masters, seeking safety and favor with the new power, would simply bypass the ravaged city. Its reason for existence, the river of commerce that flowed through its gates, would be dammed up and diverted elsewhere. Stripped of its people, its infrastructure, and its economic purpose, the city was left with nothing. Its fate was sealed not by the desert's slow encroachment, but by the swift, decisive stroke of geopolitics. In the most extreme cases, like Merv, the violence was so thorough that the site was rendered uninhabitable for generations. The silence that followed was absolute, a ghost town preserved not by sand, but by memory of the horror that occurred there. Its story survived only in the chronicles of the victors, a grim footnote in the history of an empire's expansion. This path to oblivion presents us with a chilling duality. A desert capital could be brought down by the slow, impersonal forces of nature or economics, or it could be chosen for extinction by the very human will of a conqueror. One is a tragedy of circumstance, the other a tragedy of intent. Both, however, lead to the same haunting silence, leaving us to wonder if any achievement, no matter how brilliant, can ever be truly permanent in a world of shifting sands and shifting powers. The most elusive capital is one that leaves no stones to find. Among all the vanished desert powers, the land of Punt stands apart, a civilization defined not by its ruins but by its profound absence. For over 1,000 years, Punt was ancient Egypt's most legendary trading partner, a source of almost mythical wealth. Egyptian pharaohs dispatched great expeditions south, returning with cargo that fueled their kingdom's prestige: gold, fragrant myrrh resin, dark ebony wood, gleaming ivory tusks, and living exotic animals like baboons and giraffes. These were not just goods, they were the ingredients of divinity, used in temple rituals and royal burials. Punt was so central to Egyptian identity that it was called the Land of the Gods, a place of both material and spiritual bounty. The Egyptians left remarkably detailed records of their dealings, carving scenes on temple walls that show the Puntites as distinct people. Their rulers, a man and a woman, are depicted with dignity, living in unique, beehive-shaped houses raised on stilts above the ground, suggesting a coastal or riverine environment prone to flooding. We see the trading ceremony, the unloading of treasures, a vibrant diplomatic and economic relationship frozen in stone. And yet, despite this wealth of description, the physical heart of Punt, its capital city or primary port, has never been conclusively found. It is a place that exists powerfully in records but vanishes from the landscape. This makes Punt a different kind of mystery altogether. Its loss is not architectural but geographical. The central debate among scholars is not why it fell but where it ever was. The clues point in two general directions. One strong candidate is the Horn of Africa, modern-day Eritrea, Ethiopia, or Somalia. The flora and fauna depicted, like the baboons, align with this region. Other evidence, including the types of resins and the potential sailing routes described, points across the Red Sea to the southern Arabian Peninsula, in modern-day Yemen or Oman. Each theory has compelling evidence and each faces significant contradictions. The frustrating truth is that Punt might not have been a single, centralized capital in the way we imagine Egypt or Rome. It could have been a confederation of coastal trading cities, a network of ports sharing a common culture and controlling the flow of inland resources to the sea. Its capital may have shifted with the seasons or with political tides, making it a moving target on an ancient map. Its rise to prominence in Egyptian records was a product of perfect timing and mutual need. When Egypt was strong and ambitious, its pharaohs had the resources to mount major naval or overland expeditions to secure Punt's luxury goods. In return, Puntite rulers gained access to Egyptian grain, tools, and craftsmanship. This symbiotic trade created a golden age of exchange, weaving Punt firmly into the story Egypt told about itself. But empires change. As internal divisions and external pressures weakened New Kingdom Egypt, the political will and organizational capacity for such grand voyages dissipated. At the same time, the world's trade networks were evolving. New middlemen may have emerged, controlling the flow of African and Arabian goods, making direct voyages to Punt less necessary or more difficult. The knowledge of the precise routes, the sailing charts, and the diplomatic contacts faded with the generations. Punt did not collapse in fire or earthquake. It simply receded over the horizon of memory. transforming from a real partner into a half-remembered legend, a golden land lost in the mists of time. Punt's story challenges our very definition of a lost capital. It asks us, what is a city if not a physical place? Can a civilization exist primarily as an idea in the mind of another? The silence left by Punt is not the silence of abandoned streets, but the silence of a missing page in the atlas of history. It reminds us that some of the most important connections in the human story are held together not by stone, but by stories, and when those stories stop being told, a world can disappear. That missing page in the atlas is the central puzzle for any explorer of the vanished. The search for a lost desert capital is not a simple treasure hunt with a clear map, but a detective story where the map itself is fragmented, written in fading ink. Historical texts, our primary guides, speak in a language of uncertainty. They use archaic place names that no longer appear on any modern chart. Descriptions of travel distances can be wildly inconsistent, based on the pace of a camel caravan or the memory of a scribe who may never have made the journey himself. The very landscape these texts describe is a shapeshifter over millennia. A mighty river, cited as the lifeblood of a city, might have completely dried up, its ancient bed now just a faint scar in the desert. A coastline described in detail may have eroded miles out to sea, or silt may have pushed the land far beyond its old boundaries. This means the physical coordinates we seek are constantly moving through time. A legendary capital could, in theory, be buried directly beneath a bustling modern metropolis, its foundations hidden under centuries of subsequent life. Or it could lie in a region so remote, so inhospitable, or so politically unstable that systematic excavation is simply impossible, leaving its secrets guarded by sand and circumstance. This forces modern seekers to become masters of synthesis. They must cross-reference poetic lines from ancient manuscripts with the stark, objective gaze of satellite imagery, looking for unnatural geometric shapes or the ghostly outlines of walls beneath the sand. They study geological surveys to understand where water once flowed. They listen intently to local oral traditions, stories passed down for generations that might hold a kernel of geographical truth, a name, or a description of the old place. Every potential identification is a fragile hypothesis, a theory built from scattered clues, and in a beautiful twist of irony, sometimes the greatest discovery is not finding something new, but finally recognizing what has been there all along. A known ruin, studied for years under a different, incorrect name, can suddenly reveal itself as the very lost city you were seeking, its true identity hiding in plain sight, waiting for the right key to turn in the lock. This layer of geographic mystery adds a profound depth to the quest. It reminds us that these places are lost not just to time, but to our very ability to locate them on the world we think we know. The search for a lost city is often a search for a crossroads, a point where worlds collide and create something entirely new. In the Syrian desert, that point was Palmyra, a caravan oasis that became a capital of breathtaking ambition. Its wealth was born from a simple, powerful geography. It sat directly on the seam between two superpowers. To the west lay the Roman Empire, to the east the Parthian, and later Sasanian Persian Empire. Every caravan of silk, spices, and luxury goods moving between these rivals had to pass through Palmyra's gates, and the city grew immensely wealthy by taxing that flow. But Palmyra was far more than a toll booth. It was a cultural alchemist. With that wealth, it built a stunning metropolis that blended architectural styles into a unique Palmyran identity. Grand colonnades stretched for nearly a mile, lined with columns in the Greco-Roman style. Yet its most sacred space, the vast Temple of Bel, fused Roman courtyard design with Eastern decorative motifs and Mesopotamian religious practice. Walking its streets, you would hear Aramaic, Greek, Latin, and Arabic, and see garments and customs from across the known world. This was a frontier capital that mastered the art of belonging to multiple worlds at once, until it decided it belonged to none of them. That decision came from a leader of legendary ambition, Queen Zenobia. In the 3rd century, as Rome was gripped by internal crisis, Zenobia saw an opportunity. She declared Palmyra the capital of its own independent empire and launched a breathtaking military campaign. Her forces seized Roman Egypt, marched into Anatolia, and for a brief, dazzling moment, it appeared this desert capital might redraw the map of the ancient world. Palmyra was no longer a client city, it was a rival empire. Rome, however, could not let such a challenge stand. The Emperor Aurelian, a brilliant military restorer, marched east. After a series of battles, he defeated Zenobia's armies, captured the queen herself, and in the year 273 laid siege to Palmyra. The city fell, and its fate was severe. Aurelian allowed his troops to sack the city, a calculated act of destruction meant to erase its political pretensions forever. While Palmyra was not completely abandoned and would persist as a minor Roman and later Byzantine garrison, its golden age was irrevocably over. The vortex of trade and culture that had defined it slowly dissipated. Its monumental arches and temples remained, but as monuments to a past ambition, not a living capital. The story of Palmyra feels uniquely complete, a rapid rise and a swift, decisive fall documented in classical histories. Yet its legacy carries a haunting, modern echo. In the 21st century, the ancient ruins of Palmyra became tragically entangled in modern conflict. Significant portions of its monumental architecture, which had survived for nearly 2 millennia, were deliberately damaged. This modern loss adds a profound, sobering layer to its history. It reminds us that the vulnerability of these places does not end with their initial disappearance. Their physical remains, the very stones that hold their stories, can remain caught in the crosscurrents of history long after the caravans have stopped and the empires have turned to dust. Palmyra's tale is one of brilliant synthesis and devastating overreach, a warning that even the most cosmopolitan and powerful of crossroads can be broken when it challenges the established order. It forces us to ask, what is the true price of ambition, and how do we protect the fragile, stone memories of those who dared to dream between empires? This cultural alchemy was their greatest creation, yet also their most perilous possession. A desert capital like Palmyra did not just trade in goods, it traded in identities, weaving threads from Rome, Persia, Arabia, and the steppe into something entirely new. This synthesis was visible everywhere, in statues that draped Roman togas over distinctly Eastern faces, in temple rituals that honored local gods alongside imported ones, and in a legal system that accommodated merchant customs from a dozen lands. This wasn't mere imitation, it was confident innovation, a culture declaring it could belong to many worlds at once. That blended identity became a powerful source of resilience and creativity, allowing the city to negotiate with multiple powers and adapt new technologies from across continents. Its artists and thinkers operated in a space between traditions, free to combine, to experiment, to invent. For a time, this cultural fluidity was its superpower. But that same fluidity could harden into a declaration of independence, as it did under Zenobia. When a city built on synthesis decides it is no longer a bridge but a destination, a new empire in its own right, it challenges a fundamental order. To the homogeneous empires on either side, Rome and Persia, this hybrid capital was now a profound anomaly. Its strength was not born of pure lineage or ancient tradition, but of pragmatic mixing. That could be seen not just as political rebellion, but as a kind of cultural heresy. The unique identity that made it vibrant also made it threatening, a living proof that there was another way to be. And so when the military response came, the goal was often more than just conquest. It was cultural correction. The dismantling of such a place aimed to unravel the synthesis itself. Temples to hybrid gods might be rededicated or destroyed. Artistic styles born of fusion ceased to be commissioned, their masters scattered. The delicate ecosystem of ideas that required a constant influx of diverse people and open exchange simply collapsed. What is lost, then, is far more than buildings and people. It is a specific recipe for human creativity, a particular flavor of civilization that can never be exactly recreated. We lose the potential futures that culture might have imagined, the art it never made, the technologies it might have pioneered. The silence that follows is not just an empty space on a map, but the end of a conversation between worlds that was happening nowhere else in quite the same way. Each of these lost capitals was a unique answer to a timeless question. How do we live together with those who are different from us? Their ruins are the shattered vessels of those experiments. South of Egypt, the kingdom of Kush built a civilization that would not just rival its northern neighbor, but for a time command it. For over 1,000 years, Kush was a dominant force along the Nile in what is now Sudan, its story one of shifting power and remarkable adaptation. Unlike the single, fixed capitals we have seen, Kush mastered a strategic duality, moving its royal heart between two great centers, Napata and later Meroe, as the needs of empire evolved. This was a kingdom that learned to thrive in the margin between desert and river, and its legacy challenges our simplest notions of ancient African history. The first powerhouse was Napata, nestled beneath the sacred mountain of Jebel Barkal. This site was deeply spiritual, believed by the Kushites to be the dwelling place of the god Amun. From here, around the 8th century before the Common Era, Kushite kings grew so powerful that they marched north, conquering a divided Egypt and ruling as its 25th dynasty, the famed Black Pharaohs. For decades, they presided over a reunited Nile Valley, restoring traditional art and architecture. This was Kush not as a remote desert outpost, but as the center of a classical world. Yet empires shift. After Assyrian invasions pushed them south, the Kushites made a decisive and brilliant move. They transferred their primary capital over 200 miles further up the Nile to Meroe. This new location was a masterstroke of political and economic calculation. Meroe sat in a semi-arid region, but it was blessed with something Napata lacked: vast forests and rich deposits of iron ore. Here, Kush transformed itself from a riverine kingdom into an industrial powerhouse. The city became a furnace of innovation, its skies lit by the fires of countless smelters. Kushite iron, stronger and more readily produced than the bronze of the era, armed its warriors and fueled its trade, becoming a coveted commodity across northeastern Africa. The wealth from this industry, combined with its control of north-south Nile trade and east-west caravan routes from the interior of Africa, made Meroe spectacularly wealthy. And its rulers chose to display that wealth in a language all their own. They built hundreds of steep-sided, distinctive pyramids, smaller and sharper than the Egyptian style, as tombs for their kings and queens. They developed their own written script known as Meroitic. To this day, despite our understanding of its sounds, the meaning of most Meroitic texts remains just out of reach, a silent voice from the past. For centuries, Meroe was a cosmopolitan hub, a center of industry, worship, and royal authority that interacted with the Mediterranean world and deep Africa alike. So what could possibly bring down such an adaptable, resilient civilization? The end of Meroe appears to be a textbook case of a society gradually undermining its own foundation. The very engine of its success, the massive iron industry, required enormous amounts of charcoal, leading to widespread deforestation. With the trees gone, the fragile soil was left exposed. This, combined with possible overgrazing by livestock, likely triggered severe erosion, stripping the land of its ability to support a large urban population. At the same time, external pressures mounted. The rival Axumite kingdom to the east was rising, its power based on Red Sea trade, and it may have begun to divert or challenge the commercial networks that fed Mara's wealth. The world was changing, and Mara's geographical advantages were slowly being neutralized. There is no record of a single catastrophic invasion. Instead, the city seems to have simply faded, its industrial fires cooling one by one, its royal court losing its influence, its people perhaps dispersing to smaller, more sustainable settlements. By the middle of the 4th century, Mara was largely abandoned. Its elegant pyramids stood silent, slowly being embraced by the sand, marking not just the end of a city, but the closing chapter of a major African civilization that had once ruled the Nile. The fall of Kush presents a profound and intimate irony. The resource that powered its golden age, the forests that fed its forges, may have been consumed in the process, leaving the kingdom ecologically exhausted. It is a reminder that even the most brilliant adaptation carries a hidden cost, and that a society's greatest strength can, over time, become its most critical vulnerability. The silent lesson of Mara's cooling forges is a difficult one to hear. A civilization can be its own undoing, not through malice, but through the simple, relentless arithmetic of consumption. The story of a desert capital's collapse is often framed as a tragedy inflicted from the outside, by invaders or a shifting climate. Yet sometimes, the most powerful force of destruction came from within, woven into the daily acts of building, feeding, and fueling a thriving city. This is the path of environmental degradation, a slow, self-inflicted wound that weakens a society until it can no longer bear its own weight. Consider the basic requirements of a growing metropolis. Every monumental temple, every royal palace, every common home required timber, vast quantities of it, harvested from the limited ribbons of forest along riverbanks or from distant highlands. The need for fuel was even more insatiable. Cooking fires, artisan workshops, and in places like Marabe, massive industrial smelters, all demanded a constant supply of wood converted into charcoal. A forest is not an infinite resource. When the rate of harvesting outpaces the land's ability to regenerate, the trees simply vanish. The consequences cascade. Without roots to hold the soil, the thin, precious top layer washes away with the next rain, or is carried off by the unceasing wind. What was once fertile ground becomes barren, incapable of supporting the farms needed to feed the very population that cleared it. Agriculture itself could become a source of internal stress. To feed thousands in an arid environment required ingenious but risky irrigation. Canals and ditches diverted precious river water to fields. Yet in hot, dry climates, irrigation water evaporates quickly, leaving behind dissolved salts in the soil. Season after season, this salt accumulates, slowly poisoning the land. Crops struggle, then fail, on fields that once provided abundance. The community, facing hunger, might respond by clearing more land or digging more canals, accelerating the cycle of depletion. Similarly, a growing city's appetite for protein could exhaust local wildlife. Overhunting could wipe out herds of gazelle or other game, removing a crucial buffer in years when crops were poor. The most haunting aspect of this process is its invisibility in the short term. For a king or a merchant living in a city's golden age, the system works. The wood arrives, the fields are green, the markets are full. The focus is naturally on growth, on monument building, on celebrating prosperity. The long-term cost, the gradual drawing down of nature's capital, is easy to overlook until a tipping point is crossed. Suddenly, the forests are too far away to log economically. The soil will no longer yield a good harvest, no matter how much water is poured upon it. The resilience of the local environment is gone. At this moment of internal ecological stress, the society is at its most vulnerable. Then, an external pressure arrives. It might be a decade of unusually severe drought, a slight shift in the climate that pushes a marginal system over the edge. It could be the approach of a rival army, a demand for tribute it can no longer afford. Where a healthy, resilient society might withstand such a shock, a depleted one finds it has no reserves left, no room to maneuver. The combination is fatal. The internal weakness magnifies the external threat, and the collapse that follows appears, to later historians, as a sudden catastrophe. But its roots were planted generations earlier, with every tree felled and every field salted. These stories are not mere ancient history, they are profound case studies in sustainability. They demonstrate with stark clarity that even the most brilliant human engineering, the most advanced canats and systems, cannot indefinitely compensate for the overexploitation of a fragile ecosystem. A desert capital was the ultimate test of balance, a high-wire act between human ambition and environmental limits. The ruins we find today are often the archaeological signature of that balance failing, a silent testament to the fact that no society, no matter how grand, operates in a vacuum. It is always in a dialogue with the land that sustains it, and when that conversation turns from mutual support to relentless demand, the ending is already written in the slowly eroding soil. The Arabian Peninsula holds more than the memory of sand and caravans. Long before the rise of Islam, this landscape was home to sophisticated urban worlds that have since dissolved into the desert's silence. Among them, the great trading city of Qaryat al-Faw stood as a testament to a forgotten Arabia, one of bustling markets and irrigated fields, not just endless dunes. Located in southwestern Saudi Arabia, this capital of the Kinda Kingdom was a nexus of commerce, where incense from the south met goods from the Mediterranean and the east. Its wealth was built not on a single resource, but on its position as a vital way station on the north-south caravan routes, a place where the desert's harsh rules were temporarily suspended. Walking through Qaryat al-Faw at its peak, you would have encountered a city of surprising complexity. Grand temples dedicated to local deities stood alongside rows of shops and multi-story dwellings. A sophisticated system of wells and irrigation channels turned the surrounding wadis into productive agricultural land, supporting a settled population that grew grains and dates. The city was a cultural crossroads, with inscriptions found there written in a mix of scripts, including South Arabian, Aramaic, and early Arabic, revealing a society in conversation with the wider ancient world. This was not a nomadic encampment, but a planned, permanent urban center with a distinct identity, governed by powerful tribal confederations that managed trade, water rights, and diplomacy. Their existence completely upends the later stereotype of a pre-Islamic Arabia defined solely by tribalism and transience. Here was evidence of a stable, urbanized civilization that mastered its environment for centuries. Yet by the 4th or 5th century, Qaryat al-Faw was abandoned. Its magnificent temples fell quiet, its markets emptied, and its irrigation channels slowly filled with wind-blown sand. The reasons for its disappearance are not recorded in any detailed chronicle from the city itself, leaving archaeologists to piece together a narrative from the stones and the shifting climate. The most likely explanation mirrors the fates we have seen elsewhere, a convergence of environmental and economic pressures. The region appears to have undergone a period of increased desiccation, a slow drying that would have strained the agricultural base and depleted the precious water tables that fed the city's wells. At the same time, the political and trade networks that sustained it began to unravel. The Roman Empire's focus shifted, and new powers emerged, potentially redirecting the lucrative caravan traffic along different paths. The Kinda Kingdom's influence waned, and without the protective and organizational power of a strong central authority, the city's delicate balance collapsed. These pre-Islamic cities, including those associated with the ancient Thamud people mentioned in later poetry and tradition, form a profound and shadowy prelude to history. They represent a cycle of urbanization that rose and fell independent of the empires to the north and south, their stories preserved only in fragmentary inscriptions and in the oral traditions that would later be woven into Islamic historical memory. Their vanishing act is particularly poignant because it occurred just centuries before a new, enduring civilization would emerge from the same peninsula. They are the missing chapters, the proof that Arabia's deserts had fostered complex urban life long before the revelations at Mecca. Their ruins offer a silent challenge, forcing us to see the desert not as an eternal void, but as a landscape that has repeatedly given birth to sophisticated worlds, only to reclaim them when the delicate equations of water, trade, and power finally broke down. What might we have learned from the libraries of Qaryat al-Faw had they survived? Their silence is a reminder that history is written not only by the victors, but by those who left just before the story truly began. The city's walls were a declaration of permanence, but its survival depended on a pact with those who embraced the wind. Every desert capital existed in a delicate dance with the nomadic peoples who called the surrounding emptiness home. This was not a simple division between the civilized and the savage, but a complex, symbiotic partnership that could make or break an empire. The nomads were the desert's true masters, their lives a map of hidden water sources and safe passages known only through generations of memory. For a settled city, their knowledge was priceless. Caravans laden with silk or incense did not travel blindly. They hired nomadic guides and paid for protection, ensuring safe passage through territories controlled by powerful tribes. In return, the city offered a fixed point on that vast map, a bustling marketplace where nomads could trade livestock, wool, and salt for grain, metal tools, textiles, and luxury items they could not produce themselves. It was a grand exchange, a meeting of two worlds that created a functioning whole. But this partnership was always fragile, balanced on a knife's edge of mutual need. A shift in the delicate environmental balance could shatter it instantly. In years of good rains, when the desert bloomed and herds thrived, the relationship was often peaceful. The city had its goods, the tribes had their pastures, and the caravans moved freely. Yet when drought gripped the land, as it inevitably did, the equation changed. The nomads' grazing lands would wither, their herds grow thin. Faced with hardship, their options narrowed. They could move deeper into unforgiving territory, or they could turn toward the settled lands, the gleaming city that represented stored wealth and resources. What began as trade could quickly turn to raid, a desperate bid for survival that the city's rulers would view as sheer banditry. This tension was a constant undercurrent, a storm always brewing on the horizon. Political missteps could spark that storm just as easily. A greedy urban official might impose unfair taxes on nomadic goods at the city gate, or a powerful merchant family might renege on a long-standing agreement for safe passage. Such slights were not merely business disputes, they were breaches of honor and trust in a culture where such bonds were paramount. If a city's rulers lost the allegiance of the nomadic tribes, the consequences were swift and severe. The protective veil over the trade routes would be lifted, caravans would be attacked, their goods plundered, their drivers lost. The vital flow of commerce, the city's lifeblood, would slow to a trickle and then stop entirely. Worse, the city's own hinterland, the farms and satellite villages that supplied it with food, would become vulnerable, destabilized by nomadic groups who no longer felt any obligation to peace. In the most profound endings, the city did not just suffer from nomadic raids, it was ultimately reclaimed by the nomadic way of life itself. After a major crisis, whether environmental or political, the urban population might disperse or face profound loss. The surviving nomadic groups, perhaps those who had once been its partners or its guards, could move into the abandoned spaces, but they had little use for aqueducts, theaters, or grand administrative buildings. Their world was one of mobility, of animal husbandry, of oral tradition under open skies. They might use the stone ruins for temporary shelter or as a seasonal meeting place, but they had no incentive to maintain the complex, fixed infrastructure of a capital. Without constant upkeep, the qanats clogged with sand, the plaster crumbled from the walls, and the irrigated fields returned to scrub. The city was not destroyed. It was simply allowed to return to the desert from which it had been so painstakingly carved. Its form was incompatible with the lifestyle of its inheritors, and so it was left to the wind, a monument to a forgotten pact between two ways of living that, for a glorious moment, had found a way to thrive together. Their greatest inventions were often invisible, flowing silently beneath their feet. The true wonder of a desert capital was not its skyline, but its hidden veins, the intricate networks of tunnels and channels that defied the aridity above. At Petra, engineers carved conduits into canyon walls and laid ceramic pipes to capture fleeting rainwater. The Garamantes dug gently sloping tunnels for miles to tap ancient aquifers deep below the Sahara. Across Persia, the qanat system became an art form, a subterranean latticework that brought mountain water to sun-baked plains. These were not mere projects. They were civilizations betting their survival on hydrological genius, turning lethal environments into gardens of empire. For generations, it worked spectacularly. The desert bloomed, populations swelled, and wealth accumulated under the confident assumption that human cleverness had finally outwitted nature. But every technology, no matter how brilliant, operates within a hidden set of rules. The first rule was maintenance. A qanat or a fagara was not a build-it-and-forget-it solution. It was a living, breathing system. Skilled workers, often from families who passed the knowledge down for centuries, had to regularly descend into the pitch-dark tunnels to clear silt and reinforce walls. This required a stable, organized society with the resources and social cohesion to invest in this unglamorous, ongoing work. If political order fractured, or if economic priorities shifted, the maintenance crews might disband. Slowly, silently, the tunnels would begin to clog. A second rule involved fragility. These subterranean webs were astonishingly vulnerable to forces beyond human control. A major earthquake could collapse miles of tunneling in an instant. During times of conflict, a besieging army didn't need to storm the walls. They could simply locate and block the city's water source, a strategy of environmental sabotage that could bring a metropolis to its knees in a matter of weeks. The technology that granted life could also become a strategic liability. The most profound limit, however, was the source itself. In many cases, these systems were not tapping into renewable rivers or regular rainfall. They were mining water from the past. The fossil aquifers of the Sahara or the Arabian Peninsula were like vast, buried savings accounts filled during a different climatic era when the region was wetter. Once opened, there were no new deposits. Every gallon drawn was a gallon permanently lost. The engineers who designed these systems may not have understood the concept of fossil water, but they lived with its consequence, a slow, inevitable drawdown. For a century or two, the depletion was unnoticeable. The water kept flowing, but eventually the wells had to be dug deeper, the tunnels had to be extended. The energy and labor required to lift the water grew exponentially. What was once a sustainable marvel became a desperate, exhausting struggle against a dwindling resource. The society would find itself working harder and harder just to maintain the status quo, leaving little surplus for culture, defense, or innovation. This is the haunting paradox etched into these ruins. The very technological breakthrough that enabled the city's rapid rise often contained the quiet blueprint for its potential decline. It allowed a population to grow beyond what the natural environment could support. creating a dependency on an artificial system that itself depended on a finite resource. The city became a kind of magnificent trap. When we stand before the silent grandeur of Petra's carved facades or trace the ghostly lines of Garamantes fields in the sand, we are not just looking at the end of a city. We are witnessing the final chapter of a breathtaking experiment in pushing technology to its absolute limit. These stones ask us a difficult question about our own world. What happens when our most brilliant solutions allow us to temporarily bypass a fundamental natural limit? And what do we owe to the future when that temporary bypass begins to expire? The silent stones never tell just one story. Unraveling the final days of a desert capital is a puzzle that demands more than a single kind of knowledge. It requires a conversation between disciplines, a merging of timelines from the earth, the economy, and human ambition. Historians pore over ancient texts for mentions of war or a king's folly. Archaeologists sift through layers of ash, silt, and abandonment. Climatologists drill into ice cores and lake beds, reading the chemical diaries of ancient droughts. Economists model the flow of goods and the fragility of trade networks. Only when these voices speak together can we begin to hear the faint, complex echo of a civilization's end. The question is no longer simply what happened, but how these forces intertwine to create a point of no return. Explaining a city's disappearance is rarely a matter of finding a single culprit. It is almost always about a perfect storm, a cascade of events where one blow makes the next one more devastating. Think of it like a tower of carefully balanced blocks. A primary trigger, like a major earthquake or a brutal invasion, might knock several blocks loose. The society reels, but it could potentially rebuild. Yet if that quake also shattered the irreplaceable water channels, or if that invasion coincided with a third year of failed rains, the damage becomes insurmountable. The initial shock is followed by a prolonged inability to recover. The city, already weakened, now faces a slow bleed of economic collapse as trade partners look elsewhere for stability. What might have been a survivable crisis becomes a death sentence because the usual buffers, the reserves of food, wealth, and social cohesion, were already depleted. Another pattern is not a sudden blow, but a slow, grinding systems failure. Here, there is no single dramatic event. Instead, multiple stresses begin to reinforce each other in a vicious downward spiral. A prolonged drought places immense strain on agriculture, leading to scarcity and rising food prices. This economic hardship fuels social unrest and erodes trust in the ruling class. Political fragmentation follows as different factions vie for control of dwindling resources. This internal conflict makes coordinated action, like large-scale canal repair or negotiating with nomadic tribes, impossible. The neglected infrastructure decays further, which deepens the environmental and economic crisis. Each problem amplifies the others, locking the society into a spiral it cannot escape. The end, when it comes, feels less like a collapse and more like a gradual fading, as people simply lose the collective will and capacity to sustain the grand urban experiment. This is where a crucial modern concept helps us understand the ancient past: resilience. Resilience is a society's ability to absorb shocks, to adapt, and to reorganize without losing its essential function. A highly specialized desert capital often had astonishingly low resilience. Its entire existence was built around a single, brilliant function, like being the ultimate tax station on a specific incense route or the sole processor of a distant iron ore field. This specialization brought immense wealth and cultural flowering, but it also created profound vulnerability. When that one core function was made obsolete by a new sea route or a depleted mine, the entire social and economic system had nothing to fall back on. There were no alternative industries, no diversified farms. The city's identity was its purpose, and when the purpose vanished, the identity could not hold. So where does the truth lie for these vanished capitals? It almost certainly resides in a complex, delicate web. An invasion may succeed only because a decade of drought had already strained loyalty to the ruling elite. A trade route may shift not just because of politics, but because the wells along the old path had run dry, making the journey too risky. The sinking of Yuba was a geological accident, but its timing might have intersected with a period of political weakness that prevented a recovery. We are learning that these cities did not fall to a lone assassin, but to a conspiracy of conditions. Their stories teach us that human societies are dynamic systems, deeply embedded within their environmental and economic context. A change in one part of the system sends ripples through all the others, and sometimes those ripples build into a wave that washes the entire magnificent structure away. This multidisciplinary view does not simplify the mystery, it deepens it, revealing the profound interconnectedness of climate, commerce, and community. It makes the silence of the ruins not just haunting, but eloquently complex. The desert's greatest secrets are now being revealed from the sky. For generations, the search for a lost capital was a story of dusty boots and educated guesses, a slow, physical sweep of the landscape guided by fragmented texts and local lore. Today, that search has been transformed by a silent revolution in perception. We are no longer just looking at the desert, we are learning to see through it, using the eyes of satellites and the precision of lasers to detect the faintest whispers of human history written in the earth itself. This new perspective is changing the story of these vanished places from isolated ruins to interconnected worlds. One of the most powerful tools is deceptively simple satellite imagery. Orbiting cameras like those from NASA, a Landsat program, or commercial services capture far more than pretty pictures. They record data across many wavelengths of light, some invisible to the human eye. By analyzing this data, scientists can detect subtle anomalies, a slight difference in soil moisture, a barely there variation in plant growth. In a desert, a line of greener vegetation might trace the ghost of an ancient irrigation canal long since buried. A rectangular pattern of slightly different soil could reveal the footprint of a massive foundation wall lying just inches beneath the sand. This technology allows archaeologists to survey thousands of square miles in minutes, identifying promising targets that would have taken a lifetime of ground exploration to find, if they were found at all. Then there is the magic of LiDAR, which stands for light detection and ranging. Imagine a laser scanner mounted on a plane or a drone, firing millions of light pulses at the ground. By measuring the time it takes for each pulse to bounce back, it creates an incredibly precise three-dimensional map of the surface topography. While famously used to map ruins beneath dense jungle canopies, its application in deserts is equally transformative. It can map the micro-topography of a landscape, revealing the faintest mounds, depressions, and linear features that are invisible to someone standing on the ground. A low, eroded wall, a filled-in canal, the gentle rise of a collapsed building, all become starkly clear in the LiDAR point cloud. This lets researchers map an entire ancient urban plan without moving a single grain of sand, seeing the city not as a collection of disconnected monuments, but as a complete, functioning organism. Once a site is identified from above, the investigation moves closer to the earth. Ground-penetrating radar is like giving the desert an X-ray. A device is dragged over the surface, sending radar waves into the ground. When those waves hit a buried wall, a void, or a layer of different soil, they bounce back with a distinct signature. This creates a subterranean profile, revealing the layout of rooms, streets, and infrastructure hidden deep below, guiding excavators to the most informative spots and preserving the site by minimizing unnecessary digging. Meanwhile, drones equipped with high-resolution cameras provide a middle view between the satellite and the shovel. They can create detailed photogrammetric models of a ruin, allowing archaeologists to study every stone and crack from their desk, to measure distances with millimeter accuracy, and to monitor the site for erosion or damage over time. The collective power of these tools is revealing a fundamental truth. These lost capitals were almost never lonely islands in the sand. The bird's eye view shows they were the brilliant, dense cores of vast and intricate networks. What we once called a city is now understood as the central hub in a web of feeder villages, outlying farms connected by ancient roads, remote fortresses guarding distant water sources, and seasonal camps used by pastoralists. We can now trace the capillaries of trade and subsistence that fed the urban heart. This changes the very question of their disappearance. It was not just a single city that failed, but an entire integrated system that collapsed. When the capital fell, it was the final, dramatic failure of a network that had been fraying at the edges for generations. The silence we perceive is not an isolated event, but the echo of a much larger world going dark. The technology that lets us see these hidden cities also forces us to ask a difficult question. What do we owe them once they are found? Uncovering a lost capital is not a neutral act of discovery. It is the beginning of a profound ethical responsibility. The moment a ruin is exposed, it enters a new and vulnerable chapter. The very sand that preserved it for centuries acted as a protective blanket, shielding delicate carvings from wind and sealing fragile artifacts in a dry, stable environment. Excavation removes that shield. Suddenly, sun-baked mudbrick is exposed to rare but destructive rains. Ancient plaster can crumble when exposed to modern humidity. The site, once known only to a handful of local guides, is now on the map, and that map can be read by looters as easily as by scholars. The race is no longer just to understand the past, but to protect it from a new wave of loss. This responsibility extends beyond the physical. The story of a vanished civilization is powerful, and that power can be harnessed. A narrative about ancient glory can be twisted to serve modern political agendas, used to bolster nationalist claims over territory, or to assert the superiority of one ethnic group over another. When archaeology is weaponized to draw lines on a modern map, it corrupts the very pursuit of knowledge, turning a shared human heritage into a tool for division. The true history of these places was one of connection and exchange, yet their memory can be co-opted to build walls. Nowhere was this tragic modern entanglement more stark than at Palmyra. In the 21st century, the ancient ruins became a deliberate target in a contemporary conflict, with extremists destroying temples and monuments that had survived for nearly 2 millennia. This was not collateral damage, but a calculated assault on cultural memory itself, an attempt to sever a people from a layer of their own history. It highlighted a chilling reality that in our time, the stones of the past can still become casualties in the battles of the present. These pressures create a complex ethical landscape, especially in regions where the needs of the living are immediate. How does a community prioritize conserving a 2,000-year-old temple when it also needs a new school or a reliable water line? The choice is rarely so stark, but the tension is real. Preservation can feel like a luxury, a project for outsiders, unless the local community is woven into the process from the very beginning. The old model of extraction, where artifacts were removed to distant museums and knowledge was published in foreign languages, is increasingly seen as a form of loss in itself. Today, the most forward-thinking approaches to these sites emphasize stewardship over ownership. This means practices like minimal intervention, where archaeologists disturb only what is necessary to answer key questions, leaving much of a site undisturbed for future generations with better technologies. It champions digital preservation, using three-dimensional scanning to create immortal, precise records of structures that can be shared with the world and used to guide delicate restoration, or even to recreate what was destroyed, as has been done with Palmyra's Arch of Triumph. Most importantly, it centers collaboration. Ethical archaeology now seeks to work with local communities, training residents as site guards and conservators, ensuring that tourism revenue benefits those who live nearby, and treating traditional knowledge as a vital part of the research. The goal is to ensure that the story of the lost capital is not just uncovered but cared for, interpreted, and passed on by the people for whom it is not just history but also home. Preserving these places, then, is about more than stabilizing ancient walls. It is about fostering a respectful, shared stewardship of our collective human journey. It recognizes that these silent cities belong to no single nation, but to the long, interconnected story of human ingenuity and adaptation. Their greatest lesson may be a modern one, that our past is not a treasure to be looted or a weapon to be wielded, but a fragile, common inheritance that requires our collective care if its whispers are to be heard by generations yet to come. These ancient silences speak directly to our modern noise. The stories of Petra, Merv, and Garama are far more than archaeological puzzles. They are profound case studies in human survival, offering urgent lessons for our own interconnected world. We can see their echoes in the glittering towers of contemporary boom towns that rise almost overnight in arid regions, their wealth flowing from a single, finite resource, whether it's fossil water, oil, or a specific technological industry. Their rapid ascent mirrors the dazzling rise of a desert capital built on frankincense or iron, a thrilling but precarious bet on one golden opportunity. Just as those ancient cities discovered, a society that ties its entire identity and economy to one source of prosperity builds its house upon the sand in the most literal sense. When the resource runs low, the market shifts, or a new innovation makes the old one obsolete, the entire structure is left vulnerable. This is the peril of over-specialization, a lesson written in stone across continents and centuries. Our globalized world has woven a web of interdependence far more intricate than the Silk Road, yet it carries the same fundamental risk. A modern metropolis might not rely on camel caravans, but its shelves are stocked by global supply chains, its economy powered by digital transactions, and its stability linked to financial markets on the other side of the planet. A political conflict in a distant region, a trade dispute, or a logistical breakdown in a key shipping lane can send shockwaves through a city, disrupting lives and livelihoods in ways that feel both mysterious and immediate. This mirrors the fate of a desert capital whose lifeblood was cut off when a war 1,000 miles away closed a border or a new sea route was charted. Our systems are more complex, but the principle remains: when a city's existence depends on the uninterrupted flow of external forces, it is always one disruption away from crisis. The ancient ruins challenge us to ask, how diversified and resilient are the foundations of our own prosperity? Perhaps the most resonant parallel is the looming challenge of water. The ingenious Qanats and Fagaras were masterful adaptations, but they also allowed populations to grow beyond what their environment could naturally sustain, leading to the slow, tragic depletion of fossil aquifers. Today, major cities across the globe face similar strains on their water resources, drawing down ancient groundwater reserves or depending on river systems stressed by climate change and overuse. The story of the Garamantes is not a forgotten fable, it is a sobering prelude. It teaches that technological brilliance in harnessing a resource is not the same as managing it sustainably for the long term. A society can be brilliantly adaptive in the short run, yet blindly destructive over the course of generations, consuming the very foundation of its own future. This forces a difficult but essential question: are we, like those ancient engineers, mining the past to feed the present, and in doing so, risking the silence of our own future? Ultimately, these lost capitals teach us that resilience is not about monument building, but about system thinking. Their greatest weakness was often a lack of buffers, of alternative ways to feed their people, of flexible social structures that could adapt to shock. When the single pillar of their economy wobbled, the entire temple fell. For our modern world, the lesson is clear. Building resilience means diversifying economies, investing in redundant and sustainable infrastructure, fostering strong social cohesion, and most importantly, recognizing that we are not separate from our environment, but in a constant and delicate dialogue with it. The silent dunes hold a final, humbling reflection. No amount of wealth, innovation, or power can make a civilization permanently exempt from the laws of nature and the tides of history. The ruins ask us with quiet insistence to look at our own glittering skylines and wonder what unseen vulnerabilities lie beneath our feet, and what are we doing today to ensure our story does not become another whisper in the sand. That mosaic of ambition and silence leaves us with a final, unifying truth. From the towering obelisks of Axum to the deep water tunnels of the Garamantes, each of these vanished capitals tells a distinct story, yet together they form a single, haunting lesson about the nature of civilization itself. We have walked the ghostly streets of cities that rose with breathtaking speed, their power forged from trade, ingenuity, and a defiant will to make the impossible their home. We have traced the fragile threads of their existence, threads that could be severed by the sword of a conqueror, the slow retreat of the rains, the quiet shift of a trade route on a map, or even by the gradual exhaustion of the very resources that built their glory. Their greatest mystery may be that their downfall was rarely a single event, but a conspiracy of conditions where environmental stress, economic change, and human conflict intertwine to pull a world beneath the sand. These stories teach us that building a civilization in an extreme environment is one of humanity's most breathtaking and precarious achievements. It is a high-wire act of balance, a constant negotiation between ambition and limit, between the grand vision of a society and the unforgiving reality of the land that supports it. While we may never uncover every answer, the search for these lost cities does more than satisfy curiosity. It fundamentally enriches our understanding of human adaptability and our shared fragility. It reminds us that history is not just a record of kings and battles, but of everyday people who solved incredible problems, who built communities against all odds, and who, ultimately, faced forces beyond any one person's control. Let these silent metropolises inspire in us not only a sense of wonder, but a moment of quiet reflection. In their stones, we see our own drive to create, to connect, and to leave a mark. In their silence, we hear a whisper about the importance of resilience, foresight, and living in balance with our world. So we turn the question to you: which of these mysteries lingers in your mind the most? Is it the sunken fate of Yuba, the industrial exhaustion of Mare, or the cosmopolitan dream of Palmyra? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and if you are drawn to these deep enigmas of the past, subscribe to join us as we continue exploring the stories written not in history books, but in the very earth and stone of our forgotten world.